Okay, installing the torque tube part 2. I just want to do an update because earlier in part 1 of the video we talked about installing the torque tubes, and we did it on the bench before we installed the floorboard into the fuselage. So I had it on this bench right here, and of course the main part was sitting here, and then the front part, the front and the back, here and here was just kind of hanging there, and so the main part of that was there. We got everything in. We talked about this block and the angle of the block there on the seat base, and I do install this rear one for the EX3, even though the manual used to call for the EX2. You had to wait and you had to install it after you got onto the fuselage, but not anymore with the EX3. So I did go ahead and install that. Now, after I got it into the fuselage here, I mean, it just worked so nice and smooth on the bench, but after I got it in here and installed it, it was binding up and it got hard again, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. But obviously something had changed once I put it in here. Now, what I figured out what actually happened is we can see here that obviously the front floorboard goes up at a pretty good angle. The back changes a little bit, but not much at all, and certainly not up where those blocks are. So the rear, really wasn't affected. But I think what happened here, when I pulled this up at an angle, you can see that probably what happened is that when you change that angle a little bit here, it brought, this piece was already on, the stiffener was right here, was already on there. So I think what happened, well, I know what happened, is that little bit of angle change bound the holes that were match drilled in here, because we had to match drill these. So when I went ahead and pulled these bolts loose and popped them out and looked and let everything go to where it wanted to go. Once I popped them out, it was very nice and smooth again. Well, when I looked down from the top with the bolts out, everything lined up, the blocks lined up, the hole in the bottom of the floorboard lined up, but the block wanted to move back a little bit. So what happened is I just changed, and I just enlarged the holes just a hair. You can see it wasn't even enough to make them any different, but I just moved the hole. It's just a hair, but it's just enough to make that bind. So I went back through those holes and just kind of drilled them out, moved them back over a little to the side, and then reinstalled them. And you could torque it back up to 90. It's nice and smooth, again. But in any case, I'm thinking about maybe not really installing the last part of that torque plate stiffener until after I install it in the fuselage anymore, and you got the proper angle on this floorboard before it picks up. You can see that these blocks are just a hair in front of the bend joint. The bend joint is pretty much right at the edge of the box, so the block is in front. So when we're changing that angle, even though it's not a whole lot, but when we change that angle, that changed. So in any case, that's something you might want to look for and consider you can install that stiffener and do everything but maybe install the floorboard and then come back in from the bottom and then match drill up from the bottom to where it wants to naturally be instead of doing it in advance.